You leave a coffee cup on the wrong counter. Your partner mentions it. You explain you were in a rush. Within seconds, the conversation has shifted from the kitchen to years of unrelated grievances, and a mundane interaction has turned into a shouting match. The structure of the exchange disappears. Both people are left standing in the wreckage of a conversation that neither intended to start. Logic feels like the natural tool to use here. We assume that if we can just find the right evidence, the conflict will resolve. Yet even the most objective facts often slide off a heated argument without leaving a mark. This happens because the brain on the other side has temporarily lost the ability to process data. When a person is operating from a state of high arousal, defensive habits, your reasoning enters a vacuum where it cannot be heard or analyzed. Navigating these moments requires a shift in focus. To reach a resolution, the subject of the argument has to become secondary to identifying the specific psychological habits driving opposition. One of the primary obstacles to a productive argument is the brain's tendency to choose reaction speed over accuracy. Under stress, the mind treats a pause for reflection as a vulnerability. This neurological pattern is driven by impulsivity. The signal skips the brain's executive function and hits the reaction trigger. This creates rapid-fire interruptions. The speaker hops between topics without finishing a thought, firing unfiltered signals in multiple directions. Countering this requires a deliberate slowing of the conversational tempo. By waiting several seconds before speaking and maintaining a low, steady pitch, you create a physical space that the other person's brain is forced to enter. Forcing this deceleration starves the impulse of its momentum. It creates a gap that allows the other person's reasoning centers to re-engage, returning the direction of the conversation to your control. Even when the pace is controlled, another pattern often emerges: the inability to see any middle ground. The mind narrows its view until only two possibilities remain. This is black and white thinking. The vast spectrum of a complex situation is compressed into a binary grid of total right and total wrong. In this state, compromise feels like a complete surrender. The argument becomes a zero-sum game. Presenting a counter set of facts usually backfires. The rigid mind perceives new information as an attack, which only causes it to lock further into its binary position. The more effective approach is strategic validation. You identify the emotion behind their absolute claim, such as a feeling of being overlooked, and you acknowledge it directly. You can validate the feeling without agreeing with the extreme conclusion they've drawn from it. Introducing emotional nuance provides an exit from the binary trap. Once the underlying feeling is acknowledged, the psychological need for total victory diminishes, allowing for a more flexible conversation. There is a final pattern that often ends conversations entirely: the habit of viewing neutral observations as personal attacks. A simple statement of fact, like "the budget is over," is processed by the brain as an indictment of character. The mind stretches the objective data into a looming threat. This is the process of externalization. When a person cannot process the internal discomfort of a mistake, they automatically project the blame outward. The issue is no longer the budget. It is the person who mentioned the budget. Defending your character in this moment only feeds the projection. To bypass the threat response, the framing of the conversation must be depersonalized. The goal is to realign the geometry of the argument. You shift the language so that instead of two people facing each other, you are both facing a third, separate problem that needs to be solved. Removing the self from the focus of the conflict deprives the externalization habit of its target. When the threat to the individual is gone, the hostility loses its purpose. Productive disagreement is not a matter of having a broader vocabulary or more intellectual firepower than an opponent. It is a matter of maintaining mental regulation. It is the ability to observe the mechanics of an interaction while you are still inside of it. Recognizing habits like impulsivity, binary thinking, and externalization allows you to adjust your communication style to account for how the other person is processing the world. In your next argument, you have a choice. You can follow the momentum of the conflict into a battle of facts, or you can step back and observe the psychological patterns at play. The person who understands the underlying process is the one who ultimately directs the outcome. Victory in conflict belongs to those who stop trying to win the argument and begin managing the connection.